So you've probably seen a ton of videos on where to place your lights. Hard light, soft light, bounce, diffusion, three-point lighting, negative fill, shooting into the dark side. But that's not what this video is about, because you can do all of that and still it kind of looks fake. That's because one of the most crucial aspects of lighting is brightness. So how bright should your lights actually be compared to the ambient light, compared to each other when working with multiple lights? We're gonna use a super useful tool, no, not false color, but something way more precise. And just a quick note, Zhiyun sent me the Molus G200 for free and I'll be using it in this video. And before you jump into the comment section saying, oh great, another YouTuber trying to sell us lights he's using to light up his desk setup, I actually just came back from a commercial shoot where I worked with this light a lot. And at one point I even used it to light up the whole bathroom scene and it worked really well. So this is a legit light I'm using professionally, but this is not going to be a product video or anything. We will focus on lighting techniques. So the first key to making artificial lights look more natural is understanding the light fall off. Right now this LED tube here is lighting my face. Okay, actually it's not, it's actually the G200 up here. But before you knew that, it definitely looked believable. But why does this kind of thing work? Because, well, A, the color temperature is matching, the direction is the same, and the brightness is right. Because right now my face is darker than the light source, which is exactly how light would behave in real life. The image you're seeing here is lit with daylight only. I'm sitting next to the window, so naturally it looks natural. But why does it look natural? This may sound like a dumb question, but it's actually important. So to answer this, let's analyze the image using an exposure tool. And for now, we're gonna use false color, which you probably know. Now, what does this tell us? We can clearly see that the window is the brightest area, and my face is darker than the window. And again, that's just physics. Light loses intensity as it moves away from the source.
Yes, science!
Now, false color is great for getting a rough idea of exposure, but it has a lot of downsides. First, false color isn't standardized, so different camera brands and monitors use completely different false color scales. And second, most of the image is just gray, which means you don't actually get detailed information. You just know which areas are kinda okay, but how much brighter is the window compared to my face? Is it one stop? Is it two stops? False color doesn't tell us that. By the way, if you already know what stops are, feel free to skip this part, but if you don't, stay for a moment because this is quite important. So a stop is a unit of measurement for light. So if an image is a stop brighter, the brightness is actually doubled. Now this applies to both camera exposure settings and actual light levels. So if I change my camera's exposure from f4 to f2.8, which is exactly one f-stop by the way, I'm letting in twice as much light, so the image gets one stop brighter. If I have a light at 100% and lower it to 50%, I've reduced it by one stop, so you get the idea. A lot of professionals working with light on a film set use a light meter. They take a measurement from a specific spot and see how bright each light in a scene is. So they work with a system. They can tell exactly the key light is one stop brighter than the background, for example. But what if we had a way to measure exposure with the precision of a light meter and with the convenience of false color? Well, that's exactly what EL-Zone does. EL-Zone shows actual exposure values in stops, just like a light meter. And for the first time, we can actually see how bright different areas are relative to each other with real measurable values. The window highlights are 3 stops brighter than my face. The shadow side of my face is about 1.5 stops darker than the lit side, and so on. This isn't just a rough impression, this is actual data that tells us how light actually behaves. Now, at this point you might be thinking, wow, this seems like an incredibly useful tool. Why isn't it in every camera and monitor? Great question, and the answer is Ed Lachman. Lachman is a legendary cinematographer. He came up with this system, named it after himself, and also patented it.
I want to give something back to the film community.
Thanks, Ed. Well, still a legend for inventing it. So, if you want to get EL Zone, there's a couple of options. If you have something like the Small HD Indy 7, EL Zone is built in. For the Atomos Ninja 5, you can get EL Zone, but you have to buy a license. And if you use a Sony camera and the free Monitor Plus app, you actually get EL Zone just under a different name, probably to avoid, licensing fees. So when I first discovered EL Zone, I had a thought. What if I could analyze different natural light situations and look at EL Zone and see how the light actually behaves? So how bright is a sunlit wall compared to my face? How quickly does light fall off? And then what if I could take that knowledge and replicate it exactly with artificial lighting? Now let's see if this theory actually works. This time I'm sitting in a different spot. My face is now much darker than before because I'm not sitting next to a window. I exposed the image so the highlights on the window would be red, so +4, like in the reference image. Now let's place a light here next to me and position it in a way that motivates that window we can see in the frame, so that the viewer thinks there might be another window lighting me. I'm using an umbrella to soften the G200 and I'm placing it just out of frame for it to be as soft as possible. But here's the key question: how bright should this artificial light be? Usually I would just guess, but now let's replicate the pattern I saw in the natural light image. According to that, the key side, so the brighter side of my face, should be at +1. The G200 works with 200 watts in normal mode, so we can easily reach that exposure level on my face with only around 30% brightness. And by the way, I also added some negative fill to create the same contrast ratio on my face as in the reference image. Otherwise, it just would have been more flat. So now everything has the right levels and also it looks good. And this isn't just guessing, this is measuring light, but without a light meter. But this was just one situation with soft light. Let's push this theory a bit further. This shot was taken on a bright sunny morning. Actually not. But I started looking again at natural light images as a reference and how morning sunlight affects skin and background. Now let's replicate that look. This was shot on an overcast day, so soft, diffused daylight with no strong shadows. So I needed to add my own sun. I placed the G200 outside the window, acting as my hard sunlight source. And I wanted the light to be as powerful and harsh as possible, so I used the reflector. But here's the thing, sunlight is insanely bright. A standard 200 watt light isn't quite enough to convincingly mimic the intensity of real sunlight. And that's where max mode comes in. By pressing both the dim and CCT buttons together, the G200 jumps to 300 watts output, giving me some extra punch. Max mode locks the color temp to 4300 Kelvin, I think, so a bit like warmer light in the morning. Looking at EL Zone, we can see that the levels match our reference image quite closely, and I think it looks pretty convincing. And just like that, we've turned a dull overcast room into a bright sunlit space with just one light. Now let's take this one step further. What if we need to create a full lighting setup from scratch, where we have multiple lights that need to work together? For this, I tested another morning sunlight reference shot, and looking at EL Zone, we can see how natural light behaves. So to mimic this, I needed two artificial lights. For the sunlight slash, I'm using another 300 watts light with a spotlight attachment to create a sharp directional sun look. And for my key light, I'm using the Molus G200 placed really close to me with an umbrella to soften the light. Now the key part is balancing those two lights. If the key light is too bright, it competes with the sun slash, making it look fake. And if my key light is too dim, my face kind of disappears into the shadows. And again, instead of guessing, I'm using EL Zone to match my lights to real-world exposure levels. And now we have a balanced, natural-looking shot without any guesswork. Of course, this might not be a perfect one-to-one replication of the natural reference. And that's totally fine. I only used these two lights for the setup, whereas natural light usually has multiple sources of bounce and fill. And here's another important factor. Camera exposure. I can also expose the image brighter in camera by removing ND or opening up aperture and turn down the brightness of the lights. Now there will be less contrast and the scene has a totally different mood, more like bright afternoon. Or I can expose the camera darker and again adjust the brightness of the lights and it will look different again. Not like a bright morning, but something closer to dusk. And that's not wrong, that's just a different mood. And honestly, this is just the beginning. We've only looked at 3 lighting scenarios, but there are hundreds of different situations you could analyze and try to recreate. And the best part, you now have the tool to try this yourself. So next time you set up lights, don't just place them and tweak them until it looks okay. Take a moment, ask yourself, where is the natural light coming from and how bright is it compared to the subject? Because when you start thinking like this, you don't just light scenes, you start painting with light. You take actual control of your image in a way that separates amateurs from professionals. Just being aware of those relationships will instantly improve your lighting. At this point, a huge thanks to Zhiyun for sending me the Molus G200. It is a super nice professional light that I can honestly recommend. So if you want to check it out, I will leave links in the description. And also, if you're interested in contrast ratios, so how to fine-tune your key to fill balance, how contrast affects your mood in a scene, let me know in the comments, because that could be a great follow-up video. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and now maybe close YouTube and start experimenting with your own lighting, and I'm gonna see you in the next video. Or you just stay here and watch this one in the meantime.